Thank you everybody for being here. It's just a few minutes after 10, so I think we'll just go ahead and get started and people can jump on as they come. I'm Maya McCaffrey. I'm the director with the Boulder Watershed Collective, and we're really grateful that all of you have decided to join us on a Saturday for this community conversation. And this idea has really grown out of a lot of conversations we've already had within communities and learning about the great work that people are already doing in their communities, but also some of the challenges and some of the barriers that they're facing in getting work done. And one thing that we noticed was, there are so many small pockets of work being done, but it was difficult to have these cross-community conversations, and that there might be a really great learning opportunity if the actual community members were able to share the work that they're doing and the challenges that they are experiencing in trying to get work done. And so that's really the idea for this. And if this format worked for people, we hope that maybe this is the first of many community conversations that could revolve around different topic areas that are relevant for all of you who are working in your communities or wanting to do work in your communities that relate to wildfire. So just quickly, the Boulder Watershed Collective is trying to and is working within multiple communities, really trying to assist with a lot of these processes and kind of meet communities where they're at and help where it's needed. So sometimes that might be in planning, and sometimes that might be in finding funding resources or project management. What we're finding is every community is different, and we would like to be able to adjust and be flexible to what those communities need. I wanted to also say that this is a great time for community dialogues like this to be happening, because there is so much that is happening at the local and the regional and the state level. And I think it's really important to understand that the work that you're all doing in your communities is really relevant to the larger context of what's happening right now, although I'm not sure that sometimes that trickles down to the actual community members to really understand that there is this support that's coming from these regional and state networks too. So just real quickly, and Alison could probably speak to this better, but there have been legislative bills that have passed at the state level, which have allocated more funding towards forest restoration grants through the State Forest Service. And so for communities to be poised to receive some of those grants is really important right now. And that begins with conversations like this. The U.S. Forest Service and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, the NRCS, have also put in grants for large quantities of money in the Front Range areas. And we don't know if we've received those, but if so, there's, the opportunity for a lot more large scale work to happen. And so there's also the Northern Colorado Fireshed, which is happening across the Front Range. This is a group that is like a network of agencies across the Front Range so that we can share resources and collaborate better. And Boulder County has also started a Boulder County Fireshed, which is kind of nested in the Northern Colorado Fireshed, to better work with all of us locally too. And so there really is this support network that's growing for wildfire related work. And I want all of you to be aware of that and know how to tie into that. And that is another intention of this meeting here. So last thing, and then we'll let Amanda introduce herself. We are going to be doing breakout rooms here today, so not everybody will have access to the same conversations, but a big intention of this is to do a white paper afterwards to really aggregate all of the ideas that come out of this meeting. And that is so that you all can have access to all of those ideas and resources and share them with your communities, however that is appropriate, but also so that we can take all of these ideas and share them with our agency partners, so that they have a better understanding of what the community's strengths are and what those needs are within communities, so that we can better support communities in doing this work. Okay, sorry I talked so long. Here you go, Amanda.
All right, well, thank you, Maya, and thank you everyone for being here. It's really a pleasure to spend a couple hours with you this Saturday morning. My name's Amanda Carrico, and I'm an associate professor of environmental studies at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I'm also the director of the Center for Sustainable Landscapes and Communities at CU Boulder. And the center is really happy to be partnering and trying and supporting this event, and also I'll be helping to facilitate the workshop today. CU Boulder, or the center that's housed at CU Boulder's mission is to try to build and support partnerships in the Front Range communities, especially partnerships between the university and local community members and local organizations related to the stewardship and the management of our public lands and natural resources. And increasingly, that's including efforts like this to try to manage the risk that we all face in our Front Range communities, especially fire risk. And the goal here is to try to support and identify opportunities to build more resilient and more sustainable communities. So with that kind of mission in mind, it's really, really awesome to see this event happening, to see you all here today. The center is comprised of faculty, students, and staff at the university. We have a lot of researchers who are interested in trying to learn from what's happening in the community and to also build research programs and educational opportunities that can also, we hope, support the work that's being done as well. So one of my goals here today is really to learn and listen and to see what I can take away and bring back to the university in attempts to try to ensure that our university is being responsive to what's going on within the communities and the various challenges and opportunities we face in communities. So I really thank you for being here today. I thank you for the great work that you're all doing. This includes the work within your own neighborhoods and your own communities, but also this important work of coming together and sharing experiences with others so that we can all learn, we can all work towards a common set of goals. I'll just also add that in addition to my role in the center, I'm also as I said, a professor, and I'm a behavioral scientist by training. I do research and I teach on issues related to social and community change. And it's become very clear to me over the years in doing this work that this is where that change starts and this is how it happens. And it's through a lot of these discussions and the hard work of dedicated people and communities that really, really moves the dial here. So it's just really exciting to have an opportunity to be part of this discussion. And if I can support that work in any way, I'm really eager to do that. So thank you, Maya. Thank you, Erin and Juliet and the Boulder Watershed Collective for organizing this today. And I look forward to the discussion we're going to have.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, and one of the reasons we're really having this workshop is that we know it is challenging for communities to really begin to build this work and to connect with each other. And sort of to speak more on that, we have the wonderful Sarah McCaffrey here with us today. She's kind of a celebrity in this field and has many years in experience in this work. She's a research social scientist for the USDA Forest Service, and her research focuses on the social aspects of fire management. And so really excited to have her here and hope that you all can learn from her experience. And so go ahead and take it away, Sarah, if you've got, if you can share your screen, let us know if you need any help there with that.
I always have to press the share button to share my screen.
There you go.
Is it up?
Yes, it is.
Excellent. Come on, from the beginning. So, well, I am delighted to be here. As I was mentioning to people when I started, I actually grew up in Boulder. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to virtually come back to Boulder, so to speak, and give you folks some background information that might help you think through sort of what you're contending with and directions to go. And my focus is really kind of helping think about, there's a tendency to come up with these narratives about fire that we kind of all stick with and we believe and we think they're true and then we act on them. And my hope is to give you some sense of how to maybe think about them a little bit more critically, because a lot of these narratives don't actually hold up very well. And to say that what I'm summarizing very quickly, very big overview, is based on a fair bit of research out of social science since 2000, a synthesis that did the research from 2000 to 2010, subsequent follow-ups, which supported everything we found. Initially, most of the research was in the US, focused on pre-fire activity. Since then, there's been a lot more that has come up after, looking at during fire, after fire, and from other countries, which shows sort of consistency across all these places. So kind of the first point is that we tend to talk about communication. Oh, we just need to give people information. We need to educate the public, which kind of defaults down to this kind of thing. And there's decades and decades of social science that shows that providing information does not change behavior. It does increase awareness, but increased awareness does not inherently lead to behavior change. And that's for a lot of different reasons. Information alone rarely is all that is needed to change people's behavior. And so I guess the big takeaway I would have, if you had to boil it down, is beware of the imagined public. When we think about how we get people to have defensible space or make prescribed fire more acceptable, if you default to a reason, go out and test it before you actually think it's true, because mostly the findings don't support these narratives. Some of that's due to sampling bias. So we take the people who yell at us and extrapolate them to equal the entire public. And that's not in the reality, they're the outliers, because people who are upset with what you're doing have an interest in voicing that, whereas people who are happy or don't have an issue with it are more likely to just not voice their concerns. So it's sampling bias. It's also confirmation bias, which is what we all humans are doing in order to simplify all the information we get. Once we formed an opinion about something, then we pay attention to information that enforces that opinion, and we discount information that contradicts it. So if we think everybody has defensible space, we'll notice all the houses with it. And if we think people don't have defensible space, we'll notice all the houses that don't have it. So I'm going to very quickly go through a couple of the narratives that are we have that just aren't supported. So one is people don't understand the risk. And the reality is people get it. They understand the risk they live in. 95% say the risk is high where they live. But the problem is we have this linear idea that risk equals action, and it's just much more complicated than that. It's how we see risk depends on how we calculate risk. What's the probability? Is it this time frame, this spatial extent, and what's the consequence that we're concerned with? And so we all might be looking at actually not a fire risk, but multiple fire risks. And the other thing is, even if we agree on the risk, we all respond to risk differently. Sorry, my thing seems to be advancing on its own. And so we all respond to risk differently. And that's partly because different risk attitudes. Some people are very comfortable with risk, others aren't, and a whole mess of other dynamics that would take me in another hour to go into. But basically it boils down to seeing the risk. Yeah, you have to see it to do something. That's not enough to actually do something. This is the most common one I hear now, that residents in fire-prone areas are not taking responsibility. And help. I hope that did not just change. Okay. Are not taking responsibility. And that's just, in the end, what you have is a shared responsibility. People recognize that risk goes across the landscape. It doesn't stop at the property line. And so their point of view is, I'm responsible for managing the risk on my property, and you're responsible for managing the risk on your property. And that bleeds out into a lot of different actions. But the reality is, when we look at surveys across the country, we see a lot of people that it's generally 2/3 are engaged in some type of fire mitigation. And whether it's enough or sufficient is, we can debate that, but the reality is they are taking action, which shows a sense of responsibility about their property. And responsibility too often has devolved to this kind of conversation of, we're being responsible, how do we get them to be responsible? I hear that from homeowners we're being responsible for our land, but the agencies are not. And I hear it from the agencies in the inverse way. So I think it's helpful for us to talk not about shared responsibility in the sense of shifting, which is how I actually hear it. And shared responsibility is really, we're all in this together. How do we help each other? And this is the first one I ever ran into, that Smokey's taught the public to think all fire is bad. The reality is the public has a much more nuanced view of fire than simply all fire is bad. In fact, the vast majority of people recognize fire can have a beneficial ecological role, and they support use of prescribed fire. It's roughly 80% across the country indicate that they support prescribed fire in some way. So that shows that there's a much more nuanced view of fire than simply good fire and bad fire. And I think when we turn it into this really simplistic kind of way to try to simplify the conversation, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice. And I'll get to a reason for that in a minute. I also like to point out that Smokey came along after we'd been suppressing fires for 40 to 50 years. And I think that probably was a better message center. And I also like to point out that Smokey's kind of benign compared to what existed prior to Smokey. So he's actually doing his job really well. And it's a good job. He needs to do it. He needs to tell people not to start fires. We also have all these demographics, like we want to blame, it's these new people who are moving into these areas and they're not aware of fire and they're not active about it. And there's no data showing that new residents are less aware or less active. In fact, there's a little bit of data that suggests they might actually be more proactive. And some of that's about confirmation bias. So they're new, they recognize they don't understand the area, they seek out information. People who've lived here a long time have formed an opinion about what the issue is, and they're probably just going to not pay any attention to information. I already know about that. Plus, 60% of moves in the United States are within the county. So they're not new to the fire risk, they're just new to the neighborhood. 20% are within the state. Most states, particularly in the West, have fire risk everywhere. So again, not new to the fire risk, and only 20% are from out of state. And in a lot of places, those people are coming from, for better or worse, California, and which has had defensible space rules in place for almost 20, 30 years in some places. There's also no evidence that part-time residents are less likely to understand fire risk. Whether or not they're less likely to mitigate is a mixed. Some studies find no difference, some do. But the ones that do find it's not about knowledge, it's just about time. I'm here on the weekends. Not going to spend it mucking around in the vegetation. I'm here for a month in the summer. I don't want to deal with smoke from a prescribed burn. We also like to say experience, that's the key factor. You know, if they just experience an event, that will get their attention and they'll all get on board. And again, decades of social science research on other hazards has shown experience does not have a consistent effect. Some people, it will be that aha moment of like, oh, this is what they meant. Other people, it actually can lead to fatalism. Well, that was so big, mean, and nasty. What difference can I make? It jumped an 8-lane freeway. What difference does my doing something around my house make? So it can make people more proactive. It can make people less proactive. And actually the majority of people, it actually doesn't change their behavior all that much. What it does do is it puts fire into their pool of worries, things that they do pay attention to for a while. So it becomes more salient for maybe 3 to 6 months, depending on what else is going on in the world or their lives. And so it's easier to get their attention during that period. So yes, you can leverage that. Evidence shows that you can leverage it better when you've already been talking about the issue long before you have an event. So they're like, oh, this is what they're talking about. But it's just getting their attention. If you don't have the right framing of what you're asking people to do, that's not necessarily going to change behavior. And the other thing I like to point out is we sort of say, oh, we haven't had an event, so they're all apathetic. That's no. People have very complicated lives. They can't afford to think about fire all of the time. Our expectation that they should be doing that is unrealistic. The key is we want them to be thinking at fire at the right moments in time. I've been to communities where basically it has just become the standard maintenance, you know, oh, well, it's spring, I need to rake up my needles and do all of this. And they don't have to spend their whole year thinking about fire. It's unrealistic and probably not healthy. And then we want to, you know, come up with demographics. Oh, they're wealthy or they're poorly educated and therefore they think this way or that way. And there's no evidence that the demographics are associated with certain behaviors or belief systems in relation to fire. We also want to say, oh, it's different in the West than it is in the Southeast. Again, there's no evidence that regional differences have a meaningful effect. Really, in the end, you will see variability. Absolutely. You will find places where the new people are not aware. But it's really local. It's that local context. It's about what's the agency community relationship, what's the fire history in this area? What's the building style in this area? So those local context really does shape that variability. And I think gets to Amanda's point earlier that that's why all the really good stuff happens at the local level, because they can tailor it to what they need. Okay. So I've talked about these things that don't influence how people behave. What does? There's 3 key dynamics. One is knowledge. The more people understand a practice, the higher acceptance they have or support you have for it, both with prescribed fire, for thinning, and for defensible space. And with prescribed fire, the really critical thing there is we tend to focus a lot on fire risk reduction, but there's a lot of evidence showing that understanding ecological benefits is more important to people than fire risk reduction, or more important to a larger percentage of people. There are some people who fire risk reduction will be the key. And this makes sense to me because people, they live in these areas because they want the landscape to be healthy. it's a benefit they can actually see after just a year or two. They can see how the prescribed burn has actually made the landscape better, whereas they can't see that the fire has reduced the risk. And you may never, ever actually be able to prove it has reduced the risk unless you get a fire like the year after you have the prescribed burn. So it's kind of illogical to me that emphasizing ecological benefits is probably going to have a bigger effect. With prescribed burning, concern about smoke and concern about escape are absolutely issues that affect approval, but there's also evidence that the more they understand ecological benefits, the less concern they have about smoke, and the more confidence they have in the people who are implementing the practice, doing the prescribed burn, the less concern they have about escape. So knowledge can affect the approval or acceptance. The second factor is trust in the information provider. So if I trust you giving me this information, I'll pay more attention to it, and also trust in the people who are implementing the prescribed burn. That is clearly associated with acceptance. Whether or not local knowledge and context are taken into account is one way that people determine if this is trustworthy information. They understand this area. It's something, oh, okay, they know what they're talking about. And transparency is a kind of heuristic or a rule of thumb people use for trust. They don't have a chance to build a relationship with somebody to say, oh, I know this person and I can trust them. They look for, is this information giving me the straight scoop? And people can tell when they're being given the runaround. And if they think they're being given the runaround, then they're like, I can't trust anything you say. So transparency and telling people how things are is critical to building that trust, and it will actually save you time in the long run. Even if you are telling them something that you feel like they might not want to hear, I can guarantee whatever, they will immediately know that you are not telling them the straight scoop, and they will make up their own story, and it will be worse than whatever it is you're trying to quote unquote protect them from. So it's just better to be transparent and straight with people. Finally, interactive communication, that's the key thing shown with lots and lots of social marketing and other research. That's not the same as providing information. Providing information is like, here's a brochure, here's a website, here's, a newspaper article. That's one way. That can raise awareness, rarely changes behavior. Only changes behavior when you're asking for a really simple behavior change. When you're asking for a complex behavior change, like anything we're asking people to do with fire, it's going to be interactive. That's how you change behavior. That's how you change norms. And that's because you can ask questions. You can clarify your misperceptions. I, as the communicator, can find out, oh, the issue for this person is not that they don't like prescribed burning. It's that they have a child who has asthma and they're concerned about the smoke. Well, I can tailor my message to help them understand what we're doing to mitigate the smoke. And I can also make sure they're on a list, so I can give them a warning about it ahead of time and they can plan. So it's important for building understanding, but it's also the way that you build trust. So, okay, well, I'm not in a total agreement with this person, but they know what they're talking about. They have good intentions, and okay. So interactive communication helps with the other things. And then to go back to that study, good smokies taught the public to think all fire is bad. In communication theory, there's a communication theory around integrative complexity. And this is work that they've done that shows that less complex understanding of a topic is associated with more extreme but unstable views. So you might have somebody who gets like, oh my God, prescribed burning is the best thing since sliced bread. But the moment something goes wrong, they're going to be like, oh man, they're wrong, because they're just too extreme. When you give people more complex understandings, and that means they understand the pros and the cons of a behavior, that leads to more moderate but stable views. So they might say, well, I'm not thrilled with what they did, but I understand. If you have a prescribed fire that escapes, they're kind of like, well, this isn't a surprise. I knew it was a possibility. So, in that sense, raising concern about negative outcomes doesn't necessarily mean lack of support. It can just mean that people are trying to develop a more complex understanding of a topic. So do not take questions about or concerns about something negative as an indicator that they don't support it. It may actually be people sort of trying to get that complex understanding that actually in the long run is going to serve us better. And actually a study out of Australia sort of looked specifically at views of prescribed burning with this integrative complexity framework and found that those who raised concerns about prescribed fire were still supported its use. And actually a recent study out of CU with, I think, has found a similar findings up in Netherlands. So other quick things to think about, particularly for defensible space that have been shown in natural hazards research that affect why people choose to mitigate or not. And we find the same thing with fire. How effective is the protective action we're asking? Is it worth my actually putting effort into this? So it doesn't have to be a guarantee, like you will not lose your house if you do this. In fact, that's not transparent because they could. But it's like, actually, this really increases your odds. Ability to undertake it. I might really want to, I might think it make a difference. I just don't have the physical ability or the time to do it. So that can also affect it. And then the thing that I think we often forget about, because we get very focused on fire risk, is fire is just one of many considerations people are trying to deal with in their daily lives. And psychologists have this phrase called a finite pool of worries, which humans can only deal with so many worries at one time. And if we get one more worry in, then some other worry is going to slosh out of that pool. So, you know, we can't afford to think about fire all the time. And we have to recognize how fire fits into all these other things and take that into account if we want actually to have people hear what we're talking about. Because if we're trying to overload them, they're just going to shut down. And part of that sort of fitting it into everyday life and values is looking at what I'm asking to, how's it complementary to other things they want? The more times you have more complementary activities, changing your roof to make it fire resistant is also good for hail. It may also be good for snow, depending on the type of roof you put in. So the more complementary activities, the more you're kind of fitting it into their everyday values. And also looking at competing activities. So, you know, is there something that's a different value that they're kind of trying to do a trade-off on? And is there a way that I can make that trade-off less severe? And social norms, you have to sort of figure out how this is going to fit into what that particular group or community views as appropriate or acceptable. So to just sort of summarize, this is kind of how we tend to think about particularly defensible space. They just need to see the risks so they'll fix their mess, which kind of boils down to this graphic of, you know, recognize the risk, take action. Much more complicated. They need information to what can I do? How bad is the fire risk? Then their own personal risk tolerance or aversion. What's their experience, social norms? Do I trust the sources? All of that might lead them to think about taking action. Still doesn't mean they're going to take action. Then they're going to go into a trade-off analysis of like, okay, you know, given the various mitigation measures, how effective are they? What's going on my adjacent property? That can go both directions. They're not doing anything, I better do more. They're not doing anything, there's no point in my doing anything. Or they're not doing anything, maybe I should go talk to them and see if I can get them to do something, or we can work together. Ability to implement other values, competing laws, and if all that adds up to a positive, then they're going to act. So this may seem really daunting because it's much more complicated to sort of recognize the risk, take the action. The good news is if you look at all those things in the trade-off analysis, there's a whole bunch of leverage points in there, a whole bunch of places where you can say, well, in my community, you know, I think vegetation disposal is a real issue, or physical ability. Like I have a community where there's a lot of retirees and they just physically can't drag that vegetation out. So maybe we can get a Boy Scout group in to help do it. So there's a lot of leverage points. And just to end, a lot of what I've talked about is summarized in these GTRs. If you don't know about Tree Search, it is a very useful government database that has all of the Forest Service funded research that you can search on keywords or key authors, and anything that has been funded by the Forest Service, you can download for free there. Everything from ecology studies to social science studies. So all of those GTRs you can download or other things. And that is it.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been really amazing for me as well in the work that I've been doing on my capstone, but I also had a few questions. You did provide this website, but I think someone asked if there's one for the integrative complexity, whether you have that resource specifically.
I can track it down and send it to you.
Okay, that would be great.
And
also,
don't hesitate to remind me.
yes. Yeah, and also wondering if you would be able to share these slides with everyone. I'm sure people were taking frantic notes to get it all, but if you could provide that, I'm sure it'd be greatly appreciated.
Sure.
Yeah, wonderful. Wow.
Yeah, usually I take 50 minutes for this, so it's a little shortened and very fast, but.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I guess normally we would clap, but we all appreciate your time and your experience, and that was just such a wonderful presentation.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share. There's no point in doing science if it's not useful.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we will be moving to our first breakout rooms now. Erin, how are you doing with making the breakout room groups?
I'm all ready, and I just shared a link.
Excellent.
Board, yep.
Yeah, so for these breakout rooms, we're going to be talking about maybe more of the specific challenges that your communities face in preparing for wildfire, sort of thinking off of what Sarah's been talking about, and what are some of the more specific challenges that you may be facing. We're going to be doing this in the Jamboard, so everyone can sort of write or talk as they please. We're hoping to compile all of the things that are written down as part of the white paper in the end. But yeah, once you're in your breakout rooms, the host will explain how to use the Jamboard. They'll post it in the chat there, and then you'll just get to have a conversation and also write down on these little sticky notes any thoughts that come up for you. So I believe if you're ready, Erin, we can go ahead and create those. A Jamboard, Chris, is just an online platform that everyone can join in at the same time and write on. So.
Yeah, everyone, welcome back. Yes, that was, I feel like, a very productive conversation in our room. And yes, and I think that there's hopefully going to be more conversations in the future around some of these key challenges, because I think we could have gone on for probably another hour. So I wanted to, and Julian, actually, did you want to facilitate us sharing out some of our ideas from our groups?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, our group had some interesting discussions about sort of updating older historical homes and some of the challenges with that. And then also working on trying to work with insurance companies to really facilitate home hardening, but also more community level stuff and how you can get prepared on a community level. And also talking about wildfire partners and really focusing on the home ignition zone as a main area to work on, because that's how fires, home ignition zone, home hardening, and protecting against ember storms, since that's mostly how fires affect homes. So that's kind of what our group talked about.
In our group, we had people from Magnolia, Jamestown, and Ward, and also from the city. But there was a lot of discussion about previous U.S. Forest Service projects, thinning projects, mechanical projects, and also prescribed burns, and a lot of discussion about how local knowledge is not appreciated or integrated into project planning, and difficulties in the way Forest Service projects are implemented overall and the long-term effects that those have on the communities. And right before we got cut off, Karen was saying that she feels like the relationships with the urban centers in Boulder have good relationships with city and county. So there's maybe some difference in agency relationships there.
Great, yeah. How about you, Amanda?
Yeah, we had a very rich discussion. It's not easy to summarize in just a couple minutes, but quickly, we had 2 participants from the University Hill and 1 participant from Shanahan Ridge. There's definitely some unique, I think, challenges on University Hill that we were able to share about. Got a lot of mix of renters and homeowners. There's not a lot of existing communication in that neighborhood, and I think there was a desire to hear more about what the city's doing in terms of prescribed burning, particularly in the Chautauqua area that's related to the risk that's experienced on the Hill. Some challenges with working directly with landlords and working across the renting communities there, which have a high population of students, which have different kinds of responsiveness to these risks and capacities for change. Also, a lot of elderly homeowners who may need some additional support to do the work that we need to do to manage the land. In Shanahan Ridge, I think there is some similar kind of concerns. There's also a high proportion of renters in this area and a little more challenges reaching those. There is an organized HOA in Shanahan Ridge, and there's been some past efforts that have been successful, but also a desire to think about ways to work with the fire marshals and maybe bring fire marshals out to the communities to try to catalyze and stimulate discussion. That seems to have worked in the past, but there's a desire, I think, now to identify whether that could be done more in the future. And then really interesting discussion around fireworks, which seems to be a real challenge. There's a lot of fireworks happening on the weekends in the Hill, and you know, maybe a low-hanging fruit for policy to try to address that. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Similar kind of somewhat relevant conversations we had in our group. We were a mix of both people from urban and rural areas, and kind of different challenges, but kind of similar. There's some commonalities in some ways. People with economic disparities oftentimes have you know, harder time accessing resources, and potentially there is, in some instances, a 0-1 philosophy where, you know, I'm going to do everything, or I can't do anything, so I'm not going to do anything at all, even if there's a few things I could do to prepare my home. In the city, there is that whole people being a little more congested close to each other. So that idea that cedar fencing that reaches right up to your house, that is desirable to contain your animals and pets and keep that privacy, but also keep predators out, is also a challenge when trying to change fads and think about other options that people might think for the same functions, but a different material that's less fire prone. And then we talked about some of the challenges from more a rural perspective, and you know, just being able to, some people think, you know, doing one action and then you're done, participating in a community event and helping or doing your own home preparedness and then thinking, oh, I'm done for now. And so we talked about lots of ways to continue communication across both more urban and rural environments and the challenges there. And again, we will absolutely write up a summary from all of this. And so hopefully we can get a good idea of what was discussed in each room from the white paper as well. And so I know that we, you know, we have to keep moving. And so thank you so much for everyone discussing those key challenges. And I think equally important is to realize and activate your community's unique strengths. And so I'm really thrilled to have Alison Lerch here today. She's someone whose experience I personally admire. And so she is the Wildfire Mitigation Program Administrator for the newly formed Wildfire Mitigation Program in the Department of Natural Resources. She brings many years of experience working across sectors as a wildfire mitigation specialist. She's worked with local and state governments, nonprofits, tribal nations, and she's worked in a couple of my favorite places. She worked in Utah in the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, and also in Ashland, Oregon on their fire and rescue team. And she'll tell you a little bit more about her experience working with communities in both those positions. So thank you so much, Alison, for being here today and discussing community strengths.
Thank you so much for having me. I do not have an actual formal presentation today. I really wanted to take my time to connect and, as Erin said, just talk about some of my experience and do it together. And so if this platform is okay, where I know you can probably see me, but I really actually like seeing all of you as well. So I just want to say thank you. It's great to spend a Saturday with landowners. And that's really what I was used to be doing for a long time. my current position, and I wanted to touch a bit about what Maya was saying in the introduction of this day, of how there are, definitely some additional grant opportunities out there and for private land or other land projects. And so I'm very excited to be in this new position, and I'll just talk a bit about it for a minute. But I now work out of the Department of Natural Resources Executive Director's Office, so out of Denver. However, I'm grateful to work remotely out of Salida, Colorado. I am definitely a small town girl these days, although I am a Chicago native. And so when it comes to still trying to explain to my whole family and sort of everyone, I'm still a forest ranger, to everyone in the Chicagoland area. And I like to start with that because there's even just in general a misconception when it comes to forestry and wildfire in general and what we do and what's our role on the landscape. And then, maybe I'll say, no, actually I work in wildfire. And so then they'll say, oh, are you a firefighter? And I'll say, well, actually I'm not anymore. I work in community wildfire. And so we've got all these ways to be able to explain what we do. And even as community members, we also have different ways and different levels that we're working at to protect ourselves and our community. In our breakout session just now, it was so great to listen to, I think it was Clark, and he talked about how, not only is he a citizen and he's a resident of this community, but he's got experience and knowledge, right, to help share with people, whether or not that's his job anymore. He's got that inside him too. So we can be residents, we can be community members, and we can also be leaders as we're, trying to put forth these community efforts or trying to figure out the pathways that will fit best. So let me just go back to some grants real quick. Some exciting things that are happening at the state level right now is and I'll just name them. So the Forest Restoration and Wildfire Risk Mitigation Grant that some might know is the word furworm, and you may not know that at all, which is fine, but this is a grant through the Colorado State Forest Service. And what's exciting is that the state has now put an $8 million per year dollar amount to this grant, where before there was sort of an unknown number per year. And so that's been almost doubled per year. So this is very exciting, new opportunities. And I believe community members or, not individual community members, but homeowners associations and communities can apply for this funding. And then for just to know a little bit about what I am doing, I'm on a 3-year term position to put out $17.5 million of stimulus funding throughout the state in strategic priority areas. And on November 16th, we will be announcing our program to the state. And I'm just gonna maybe do a wink. There's a good possibility that Boulder County will be part of those strategic priority areas. So maybe keep that in as in your pocket until the 16th when you hear from us. But please keep that in your pocket right now. We're very excited for this movement. But there's one other source of funding that I just wanted to talk about. And for the state of Colorado right now, and I know that generally private landowners and communities do not necessarily themselves apply for FEMA funds, but there's an incredible amount of money in the state of Colorado right now to go to FEMA grants. And I know that Boulder County has been a part of that in the past, but if you're aware of anyone, or you have relationships with people that are in Office of Emergency Management or other that, there's a unique opportunity right now to get a lot of funding to the ground. FEMA has definitely some strings attached, but it's one of those only funding sources where you can get a big chunk of money to do a lot of good. So I'm going to close that up. I wasn't going to really talk about that too much, but just know that when it does come to funding, there is funding out there. And so if you ever wanted to circle back to me, Maya or anyone on your team, please do, just so we can make sure that you're all know of what funding's out there that you can leverage.
And can I just add real quick to interrupt you that if there are communities, all of you out there who have ideas for your communities, we are happy to work with you to try and access those funds. So that's just one option.
Awesome. Thank you, Maya. So I'm going to bring us back before I do some examples from Ashland Fire and Rescue and Moab. I've been thinking a lot about this ever since I was asked to be with you all today. And I think back to when I took my first wildland firefighting class in a long time ago in 2007. And we were learning about the anchor. Well, basically, how do you fight a fire if there's a fire on the ground? And there's a concept called the anchor, flank, and pinch. And, you know, the idea is that you have crews out there and that you set anchor points on the land where you're going to start building your line around the fire and to try and move it or shape it so that it will eventually at one point pinch and hopefully, you know, decrease in fire intensity or just lay down on the ground. And I think of Boulder, Ashland, you know, Moab. These are really unique places that have amazing anchor organizations. Also, we can anchor ourselves in community values, in personal values. But together today, we're here with you know, trying to come up and trying to move forward with, you know, a learning network, a way to come and collectively do things. And so I love that word anchor. It's sort of my new concept right now. And I do not have a PhD or even a master's degree. I just have 16 years of experience doing this with communities. But that anchor approach to me is really important because that anchor might change from what we want to accomplish within our communities. If it is that we need to start a collective or we need to start this learning network, then we need people like Maya and her team and everyone to anchor us together to show up on a Saturday, come together and say, this is so valuable. But what if it's something more directed to a specific community or a specific neighborhood? We've got to find that anchor or multiple anchors and ways that we can talk with and move our communities forward to a better place living with fire. Because I'm in hope that all of us on this call, and actually after I listened to any of Dr. Sarah McCaffrey's presentations, I'm still feverishly writing notes every time and saying, okay, don't forget that. Because we, as she mentioned, we have to erase the things that we think are the way we have to do things. And of course, there are things when we talk about trust and we talk about relationships, well, that's foundational, right? But when I started doing research about wanting to speak to you all today, I started going to the Wildfire first. I wanted to go back to Calwood just a year ago. And I wanted to think about that, yes, there has been an incident and there are many incidents that are going to happen around communities, but it's not always that people are going to want to hear about that fire. Some might. That really might be that way to say, if someone's maybe a little apathetic and you could just remind them that it does happen, but we don't have to always anchor ourselves to the one incident and that will make the change. And so I'm going to move this into some examples with Ashland Fire and Rescue. And I want to share my screen, but I think if anything, I'm going to just put some links in the chat here when I'm done, just for some of these websites you can go to. And so I want to put you in the place where I was at when I moved there in 2014. And Ashland Fire and Rescue, as well with other partners like the U.S. Forest Service, the Nature Conservancy, a local nonprofit, Lomakatsi Restoration. They had been working together at that point for at least 6 years with a stewardship agreement to do landscape level work outside of the community. And they did incredible community outreach inside of the community to make sure that we could get the work done on the landscape. But it really was this, we're not necessarily focused in the community. That was actually my job, was the community, and then their job was the outside. But this Ashland, and they called themselves the Ashland Forest Resiliency. And Ashland Forest Resiliency had already outreached to some incredible local organizations and partners. So that includes like the Chamber of Commerce and real estate agents. And, you know, kind of thinking out, they're already in a way thinking outside of the box on that. And so we were in an effort at this point to do a huge push on prescribed fire. We were meeting together and all we wanted to do was increase prescribed fire. That's also all we really thought we could do at that point. But then 2017 hit and it was a very intense fire season, and more importantly, an intense smoke season. So 6 to 8 weeks, we were the ones in the country that had the worst air quality, sort of tagging along with some areas in Montana. We didn't have anything out there for smoke or community, like how our community was going to deal with that part. And so we shifted our focus of prescribed fire outreach, because in a way we were going to talk about smoke and how we're going to put more fire on the ground. So you're going to see that column, and we need you to understand that at that point, we know what we're doing. So we had to shift that to, we've got a lot of smoke in the air. We don't know when it's going to go away, but we're going to have to come together as a community because we need to protect our resources, our community members. And for a tourist town, which I know that Boulder isn't necessarily a tourist town in itself, but you know, people, locals and other people coming to the town, they're not going to want to be on the streets as much, going into shops, going into restaurants. And so we shifted this focus, and I'll share the website with you. And we created a program. We called it Smokewise Ashland, still there today. But my whole inspiration for being a part of Smokewise wasn't just that we created some pamphlets and we, you know, had a workshop. It was that we all came together. And to be honest, smoke and also some of these things that can happen with wildfire they're not necessarily great for our economy or our water sources. Or, you know, if we lose a home or many homes, it's terrible, right? We've got these two different sides of fire, that proactive, build the trust, build the programs, build things together. But then we also have the chance that things are still going to happen. So if we don't have that trust and that relationship beforehand, it's going to be harder for us when we have to recover from something. And so one of our first flagship events, though, with Smokewise was we wanted to increase everyone's knowledge. And I bring up that anchor, flank, and pinch at the beginning, because in some ways I believe that if we as community members or shop owners or our community leaders, politicians, what if we all understood a little bit more about the big picture of fire? And hopefully we could do that on our own time. We don't have to force this down people's throats, but there are so many aspects that a lot of times an organization can only take one aspect and they're going to run with that, and another organization is going to take another. So we decided to put together a workshop, but it was in February, and it doesn't normally snow in Ashland, Oregon. But of course, on February, I think it was the 2nd, I'll have to look back, it snowed multiple inches and there's no plows. And we're all sitting there at the community center. And we're stoked because we have some public health, we've got the fire department, we've got meteorologists, and then we've got our Chamber of Commerce. And we're just so excited. We want to bring everyone together, and we want, and landowners as well. And we want people to learn together and share. So we're nervous, of course, like no one could show up. And then over 40 people still showed up. drove their cars in the snow, even from Medford, which is not that far, but it's far enough that you could say, I'm not going today in that snow. And everyone came together and we sat down, we listened, we shared, and we came together. And from that moment on, that was our anchor. Our anchor was a snowy day in February where everybody decided, yeah, let's talk about wildfire, you know, because we're going to have to talk about it year round, regardless, if we're going to want to help work on all of these different aspects. So I'll share with you, I've only got a few minutes left, and so I'll share with you the websites after I'm done. But that was, we've got on that website some pictures, and you can see some of the products we came from that event. But really, it was about coming together. And it was also about understanding that a Chamber of Commerce may not be able to think about fire all the time, right? They've got a lot of other things going on, but they were willing to think about it, make it a part of their program, and be on the same track. And so to close this part, what I put to all of you, and I put to myself too, is to always drop our assumptions that we know we have all the right people at the table already, or that well, maybe they don't want to do this because they live in town and I live out of town, and so, you know, no, let's drop our assumptions and think about the fact that wildfire in some way, shape, or another will affect everyone in some way, whether it's the smoke or the ember or the flooding or whatever it is. It's going to affect someone. And so we definitely have multiple anchor points to be able to start those conversations. Okay, so I wanted to talk about one more. And Erin mentioned, you know, I'm so grateful. I've been able to live in some beautiful places. And if you look at my resume or where I've come from, I really have done sort of my moving around the country intentionally. Also, there are not many wildfire jobs in one place either. So you just kind of have to move around and experience new communities. But when I started my first position in Moab in 2007, I didn't really realize that this wooey wildland urban interface community work was going to be my forestry. I still sort of thought my forestry was going to be tree measuring and maybe some soil stuff, but no, I was on this community thing. And I was fresh out of college though, so I had high hopes, right? And high energy. And I was ready, I'm ready to go, ready to do all these things. But at that point in at least where we were at in Moab in the state, fighting fire and doing the community work were two separate entities, and they didn't talk that much. It was really hard because, well, they wanted to me to be a firefighter, and so I did. I got my red card, took the class, but I was just a forester community person, and so I wasn't a part of the club. It wouldn't mix yet. Things have changed, I would say. So in the last 15 years, things have totally changed, but that was my first perception of how I was going to start this and make this my career. And so I dove in and I thought, well, I can't do this alone. I tried that for a couple of years and I thought, well, that doesn't really work. And I had 24 communities that I had to go to at least once a year. And I knew once a year wasn't going to be good enough anyways to hit them. But I had 24 communities and I wanted to do a good job. So I set forth to find the partners that would fit best for me. And in a sweet little town like Moab, similar to Boulder, similar to Ashland, there's an incredible amount of nonprofit organizations that exist. These passionate people that want to do incredible things, whether it's for the environment or for whatever it is. And so my anchor organization in Moab was this organization that still exists called Rim to Rim Restoration. And it was really interesting because as I started with them, we had the exact same story. They were trying to do something but had no support. This organization wanted to do fuels reduction on private land. but also with an ecological framework. They wanted to make sure we weren't just doing things to do things. They wanted to make sure that the right species were being planted if we did. They wanted to make sure that it still was aesthetically pleasing. And I was all aboard that. So a long story short, me and this woman, Cara Dornwen, we set out to do some multiple landowner private land projects within watersheds, smaller watersheds, but everybody owned a little piece of Pack Creek and Mill Creek. Everybody owned a little tiny piece, and it was all overgrown with Russian olive and tamarisk anyways, though. No one knew where their corner was. We could overlay a map on a Google imagery, and someone could say, that's my property, but there were no boundaries. It was all together. And so for Cara and I, it was perfect, because what a challenge. We were ready for the challenge to take it on, but we just didn't realize how easy or how hard it would be to communicate with like 150 landowners. So luckily we had the forethought to start small and build our program and build our projects. But what happened was in 2018, so just a few years back, there was some fireworks play in the drainage, and it actually happened to be in one of the places that we had started to remove trees and clear, but it was still flammable. It didn't mean that just because we removed the dense Russian olive and tamarisk that the fire risk was completely removed, you know. And so some fireworks at the not in a great time and not in a great place, and right in town in Moab. And if you've been to Moab, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of vegetation, and most people don't feel like they have a lot of risk right there. Eight homes burned and a shed in the cinema court fire, and just shocked the community. However, Cara and I'd already not lived there anymore, but Cara and I had been doing this work for many, many years. And then my predecessor working with Cara. And so that really shocked the community. But one of the positive things about that is it actually created action for those landowners that had not wanted to participate in doing work. Now, it didn't mean that they came out right away and used their chainsaws and did the work. It just meant their minds changed a little bit. They saw it. They said, oh my gosh, it actually did happen in my backyard. And so that is an example that, and I'll share the Rim to Rim's website and some about the Mill Creek partnership. But I guess I just want to round this out with some things that are just so important to me as we keep doing this. And now that I'm at, I guess, sort of the state level, have a unique opportunity to help see how it's, you know, how things are going in the state, but also maybe help glean some information and some insight if let's say we do a grant program, that I can be able to say, you know, this might not work as well, but this might work better. And so all in all, I know that I didn't have a formal presentation today, but what I wanted to share is that things are different, especially with wildfire. It's going to be different in every community, and every wildfire is going to be different. Every prescribed fire is going to be different as it changes the landscape and as it changes our minds or just works within us to see how we're going to live and adapt with wildfire. And so the idea is we have to be creative. We have to be really good listeners. I loved that in our group, in our breakout, I think we had all people that lived out of town, but I would love it. And I think it was so important, going back to the Ashland Fire and Rescue, I had to do the in-town, and Ashland Forest Resiliency was doing the out-of-town, but in the end, it's all the same. We got to really remove the boundaries. I mean, we all have landowner boundaries, but we need to remove the boundaries that this is a separate issue. So whether we're working with the Forest Service, our neighbor, whatever level, the Chamber of Commerce, our mayor, we have to remove our boundaries, all of us. Start fresh and grow together.
Thank you, Alison. That was wonderful. There's a comment in the chat here saying that if you have information about resources, could you either provide your contact information or send out some of those resources so people can access them later. And I just wanted to clarify, the grant program you're talking about first was FRWRM, FRWRM from the Colorado State Forest Service. Okay, and I can put that,
Yes.
that link, I can put that in the chat myself.
And we can send that all out in an email to everybody who's on
Yeah,
here today too.
we'll add that's in the white paper as well. So we'll have
Mhm.
this culmination of all these resources for you, including hopefully we'll be able to send out this recording as well next week.
I have a
And,
question.
Yep.
For Alison. The grants that you were talking about, when we formed our organization almost 10 years ago and got a lot of grant money from the WFFR grant or WFRR Woofer grant from Colorado. We found out after we applied and after we received the grant that we had to send in our EIN number proving that we were a nonprofit organization, or we had to find a fiscal sponsor in order to access those funds. So we had to quickly form a Colorado nonprofit organization, and we got 501c4 designation, and that was enough for them. This was administered by the DNR. So you may remember it, but that was enough for them to actually give us, we did almost $300,000 worth of work in our community. Some of it with grant money, it was a matching grant. So part of that came from our community. But is that still the case when you're talking grants, when you're saying, you homeowners, you people that are banding together, go out and get some grant money? Do you still have to have a fiscal sponsor or now it's 501c3, most of the grants, you have to be a 501c3 to even apply for them. I'm not even sure we could get more grant money as a 501c4. So can you explain that to me?
So I don't work intimately in the FRWRM grant, and so I would refer you to talking to someone from the Colorado State Forest Service on that. For some of the programs that we're about to roll out, so it is more than likely property owner association, or you could be like a road district, right? Like these formal organizations, or a homeowners. I'm so sorry, I can't say that. HOA, but individual landowners cannot apply, and that is just sort of something that is I hate that is that limit, but we're looking for more than one landowner, and more a project to span, sort of community wide. A fiscal sponsor still this may not necessarily need a fiscal sponsor, because we will be and I will provide some information and link to the website, but on November 16th, as this rolls out, we'll be providing a workforce base of Youth Corps Association and other crews. And so some of the grants that we're going to be rolling out with the DNR aren't actually grants that you receive the money. It's that we will facilitate a crew to do work. So so that restriction may not be in place, that you have to be a fiscal sponsor. I hope that answers your question.
I think so. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Allison. That was fantastic. And thank you for sharing all those resources when you get a chance, and for really bringing together that idea that it's not separate, that really it's really about kind of coming together and viewing this at the landscape level, these larger levels. And so that's gonna bring us to our next set of breakout rooms, which are gonna be randomized. You'll have a facilitator in each, but you're gonna be with people from across urban and rural areas, talking about your strengths. So like Alison mentioned, these are strengths that we define really broadly, and we can be creative about thinking about, what are some skills that people might bring in your communities, hard and soft skills. Do you have people who have professional backgrounds that could potentially contribute to thinking about collective actions or inspiring actions for people? or even businesses that they own, like Alison mentioned, or getting the Chamber of Commerce involved. And also thinking about capacities, the number of people in your neighborhood, what kind of momentum has been gained. And then also resources, what kinds of organizations or grants or businesses do people work for or own? These are really outside the box thinking about strengths of communities that can really be activated to help with not only wildfire preparedness, but like Sarah McCaffrey was saying, other types of preparedness or thinking about energy efficiency, for instance. There's lots of commonalities there. So we're going to get these breakout rooms, and then we'll join the last 5 minutes and we'll just close out from today. So so the last set of breakout rooms, let me know if you have any issues. We're going to be working in those same Jam boards. I wanted to be respectful of everyone's time and end right at noon, but wow, what amazing conversations. I feel like the creative thinking and synergies were flowing, and I really appreciate everyone's time and focus today to really contribute to these conversations. I don't know if we're hoping to send out a little mini survey just to get your feedback around what do we do next? What does this group do next? Do we continue thinking about a wildfire learning network that spans across these boundaries? Is that valuable to you? And we want to hear, what does that look like to you? We also are interested to know kind of how do we support you in your next steps in your communities? Are there strategies today that you heard that you're like, I need to maybe think about that? And how do we help follow up with that individually or as a group? Do we meet every 6 months? So we're going to ask some questions in a follow-up short survey. We'd love for you to take some time to do that. We also are going to send you the video links and resources we heard about, and eventually send you that white paper, probably early next year, with the summary of this event. Additionally, we're going to send you a thank you gift card because we just appreciate your time here today, and we can't thank you enough for being a part of this conversation. And with that, Julian, Maya, Amanda, do you have anything else to add?
I'm really grateful, yeah, for everybody's time and all of the great ideas. And I have like 12 things I want to do after this meeting. So I really hope that this is a catalyst to future conversations and more work. And I hope to be speaking with you all again at some point in the future.
Yes, I echo all that. Nothing to add, but thank you very much. And it was really, really wonderful to have this time together. So have a great rest of your weekend.